kilometres an hour.
Now on BBC World News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
The pound tumbles to an all-time low against the dollar on fears new tax plans could stretch Britain's finances to their limits. And all eyes now on the Bank of England as speculation grows that the central bank could be forced to intervene. Welcome to World Business Report. I'm Ramzan Karamali. The British pound hit an all-time low against the dollar early on Monday as markets reacted badly to the economic plans of the new Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. Sterling fell nearly 5% in early Asia trading, though it has recovered some of those losses. UK government bonds are also selling off sharply, with yields surging dramatically. On Friday, Mr Kwarteng announced historic tax cuts and the biggest increase in borrowing since 1972 to pay for them. There are now calls for the Bank of England to take emergency action to calm rattled markets and bolster sterling. Well, let's see how the US markets have reacted to that. They opened just an hour ago. Michelle, what's the take on Wall Street?
Well, look, we've got the Dow opening down 100 points lower, so a kind of a negative open, but not as bad as things were looking, say, about half an hour ago. I think what you're seeing here is this growing concern, not just about the pound weakness, but also the dollar strength. That's been a kind of story here for a while now. And let me read you this, Ramzan. Such US dollar strength has historically led to some kind of financial economic crisis. That was in a note from Morgan Stanley's Michael Wilson. He's the chief US equity strategist. And I think that kind of summarizes the fear that you're seeing reflected in financial markets at the moment, from Asia to the US and obviously in Europe. The fact that there is this concern about where will the engines of growth come from, and it's not clear because obviously at the moment you have the situation going on in the United Kingdom, you have Europe and the looming energy crisis, this ongoing war with Ukraine, you have issues in the United States and in China, and so there is growing noises about the prospect of a global recession. That certainly was the forecast of the World Bank recently, and this latest kind of bout of uncertainty in the markets reflects that.
Michelle Fleury, our New York business correspondent, many thanks for your time just then. I'm sure we'll hear from you later on. Now, turning to London, let's hear now from the currency strategy, Jane Foley. She's from Rabobank. Jane, thanks so much for joining us right now. Michelle put out quite bluntly, we could be heading to a global recession. We're looking at maybe central banks making emergency interventions. What's your take on what you think will happen now?
Well, of course, this has been building for some time. The Federal Reserve has, of course, been hiking interest rates extremely aggressively for some months. And yes, that has been putting pressure on the global economy as the dollar strengthens, currencies around the world weaken, and as central banks try and protect their currencies, well, they're just sapping demand out from their respective economies. Now, we've got a weak China as well as concerns, of course, about the energy crisis in Europe. So it is very difficult to see where this growth is going to come from. And if you like, you do have a bit of a feedback loop, again, with the market just moving back into the safe haven dollar to avoid this slower growth scenario. But of course, in the last few sessions, it has been sterling that has been, one of those poorer performers. It's underperformed the euro, even though the euro has its own problems. And this, of course, was in part triggered by that budget that we had from the new Tory government on Friday.
Jane, you've been following these markets for some time now. I mean, Friday's move seemed pretty dramatic, but now we've had today as well. I mean, how would you sum up these types of moves that we're seeing? Are we right to say these are unprecedented? We're in territory we've not seen before?
Well, we'd have to go back to the crises years of maybe 2007-8 or maybe even the ERM crisis really to put some sort of correlation with it. We certainly haven't seen foreign exchange markets like these for a number of years. And again, we've seen this big sell-off in the gilts market as well, UK government debt, the market really not happy with the outlook for debt, given that it comes on top of an outlook for recession in the UK, one of the highest inflation rates in the G7 too. And don't forget, this is really important. The UK has a current account deficit. Now, what that means is that the UK is reliant on overseas savers to fund that gap. And if overseas investors look in at the UK and they don't like that lineup of fundamentals I've just mentioned, well, they'll turn their nose up at buying UK debt. And when there's so much of it, well, the price drops and sterling goes down as well.
So we noted this morning the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, was approached for his view on what was going on. He remained tight-lipped. Now I think all focus is on the Bank of England. What do you think they could do? They're not going to do something like what the Japanese government did last week, are they? It's going to be more looking at interest rates because we just don't have those foreign currency reserves, do we?
Well, even if they did have the foreign currency reserves, you'd have to question whether or not they'd really want to do it. The G7 have agreed for many years not to intervene in the markets, to let markets set exchange rates. And also, politically, it could be putting the Bank of England credibility in a difficult position because it may not work when the fundamentals might be pulling sterling in the opposite direction. And in a way, the same is true, perhaps of lesser extent, with interest rate hikes. The bank has been hiking for a number of months yet, and yet that's had very little impact in supporting the sterling against the mighty dollars. And it's quite possible that even if they go ahead with interest rate hikes of larger increments, that actually it may not do an awful lot of good in turning the pound around. That said, we do have sterling well off at the lows right now, and it does seem that the speculation of an aggressive move or even intraday move has certainly helped limit some of the panic and help stabilise sterling at a better level. But it remains, of course, a very vulnerable currency.
It does indeed. Jane Foley, many thanks for joining us today. That's Jane Foley from Rabobank.